Okay, so thanks for joining us today, Diane. It's third time lucky. We've had to reschedule the podcast twice, but here you are, and it's great to have you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Sometimes, good things are worth waiting for, but I'm happy that you've reached out, and I look forward to working with you today.
So we've had a look over your website, Teaching into the Future, and you work in education, and you specifically work through the lens of Steiner's educational philosophy. Is there any chance you can expand on what Steiner's educational philosophy is and how it differs to sort of the traditional school, like you start school, school bell goes, and you finish school at 3 p.m, school bell goes, you have your lunch, and and that sort of, just the school that we all know, well, most of us know.
Well, I'm just going to start in answering that with over COVID, what I discovered that was lying behind the word schooling is to pause. To pause. Not to fill up, not to load up and fill up with a bunch of knowledge, but to actually pause. To school is to pause. And that gave me pause to really look at that. Now, given that I've spent 36 years in and around and about Waldorf education, I would say it's taking a pause to look deeper at the human being and the development of the human being. So in Steiner education, we're really developing a curriculum that is based on human development and the various stages of human development, from 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 21. So in the span and the breadth of that, in looking at what's commonly called the threefold human being. And that is to direct our attention not towards just the thought life of the human, the mind, which current education is often targeting, especially with early Einstein kind of work at 3 years old, but also the heart. And how do we teach and pull on the forces of emotion? And how do we work with that in the classroom? And how do we work with that at 3, 6, 9 years old, 12, and so on, at any age, really, even now? And then, and how do we incarnate that or blend that into the drive, into the will, so that we have motivation and a sense of responsibility for the world by the time we're through the gambit? And so we work in that kind of a way. It's more of a wholesome way of addressing the threefoldness of the human: thinking, feeling, and willing. Okay, and so that's done synonymous with every subject in every way at every grade level. Human development lies at the core of that. And the second core principle, you could say, is that Rudolf Steiner, who was a clairvoyant in his time, connected to the European Theosophical Society in the late 1800s, early 1900s, till he split and started anthroposophia, which is, of course, anthropos, the study of the human, Sophia, the wisdom of the universe. So add the study of the human with the wisdom of the universe, you've got the great wide cosmos, like that telescope right behind me. We're looking up and we're looking in at the same time. So how do we work with that play of opposites, of looking up and looking in, looking forward and looking back, and finding ourselves in the middle? And so when we're doing that in the context of Waldorf or Steiner education, we're looking at the spiritual. We believe that there's a spiritual component that lies behind us all. And one of those tenets is the idea of reincarnation. So that we've all, which of course many other religions and philosophies embrace or not. But, and even the early Christians embraced reincarnation. You might not think that now, it's true. But the idea that the children in front of us have had other lives is quite interesting. Looking at a classroom full of kids, and you're thinking, okay, here I am, wanting to teach. Let's go with any subject, biology. And there I am, grade 5 biology. What am I teaching? And I'm recognizing that I might have a student who knows a whole lot more than that, or used to, before they've forgotten it all in this current life. And so this idea of the spiritual continuum working through Waldorf education allows us to, in a way, humble ourselves as teachers into the lens of a student. We study our students. Okay, so the subject for every teacher in a Waldorf school are the students. They're the best book there ever was, so said Steiner. Right? If you want to teach, then you need to recognize that the book of all teaching is the student, the book of the student, and each one of them is different. He also talks about the fact that in the range of the class students in front of us at whatever age group, and I've taught kindergarten through to high school in all the years that I've taught, and whether I'm standing in front of a first grader, a kindergarten child, or a grade 12 student, I'm recognizing right off the bat that that we have a connection, and I'm trying to find that connection with them. And now, at least in British Columbia, Canada, we've now finally recognized the power of connection between the teacher and the pupil in a public sense. But that's been a long, hard road to recognize that you don't get anywhere unless you have a personal connection with each and every student. So Steiner actually says, well, meditate on the students at night. This is again going back to the spiritual, to recognize that there's a power in the unseen world that lives and breathes and works through us in unique and possible myriads of ways. And so if I'm struggling with a student who might be classified as neurodiverse, I'm thinking of all the students I had who would be labeled as ADHD, right? Can't sit still. And I'm like tearing my hair out and going gray, just trying to think about how I can meet them, because they're not able to sit still and receive, and they're not able to pay attention for more than a minute or 5. I even had timed certain kids, less than a minute in some cases. How do I work with that, right? I work with that through the power of connection. I work with that for letting them be seen by me for everything that they are, for the fact that they can climb a tree faster than most, certainly faster than me. And they're thinking on their feet, but they're not able to get it down in a book. All right, well, there's many ways to showcase our learning and to showcase our intelligence. And Steiner gave many, many ways, not just through our hearts and our thoughts and our actions, but the lens of which we can really build on a relationship of being seen and seeing. So my 41-year-old students are still inviting me to their birthday parties. Okay, they feel so seen. I had a 30-year-old who lost everything in a fire in Jasper, Alberta, just last month, show up and with her new baby and said, everything that matters is right in front of me. Lost everything but her passport. So I have to say, when kids are at their lowest, and she's 31, but when kids are at their lowest, they often remember what is most important, and that connection with me in elementary school. I mean, I was her elementary school teacher that she's showing up for and with, and invited me to her wedding, right? And I just drove back from Idaho last weekend at another wedding of one of my students, who still is full of stories of things that they did with me. And so those connections are a lifetime worth, and that it goes well beyond the lens of teacher-student. Okay. They sometimes called me mom when they were in elementary school, even 8th graders, because they saw so much of me. But but more than ever, I went from being their teacher to their counselor to their friend. That's a lifetime relate. That's kind of familial. Yeah. And I can't say it happened 100% of the time. Some of those kids I've lost track of, but I know and they know that there was something real there. It's well beyond the idea that I taught them algebra, botany, or the alphabet, depending on the age group. Yeah. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, it's like you look at having students and being a teacher as sort of a privilege that you can teach or have these people as your students, and you take that as like a privilege, and you, um, like you said, you meditate on the students, which means the students never leave your mind. Really, like you're always looking for the best in those students, and it reminds me a little bit of like um, maybe some like ancient Eastern like martial arts teachers would. It's like a privilege that they have their students, and their students respect them for who they are, and they're more of like a mentor rather than a teacher, a mentor for life.
Yes. Yep. In the high school that I taught, which wasn't Waldorf Steiner based, it was more of an unschooling, homeschooling movement. But I wrote online high school curriculum for 10 years and taught it. I used the same principles that I had learned through Waldorf, and in that, bringing attention to the connection between us and attention to the various modalities of learning. We've kind of narrowed it down to reading and writing in all educational platforms, if you think about it. So what you're doing here is you're working with speaking and listening in a podcast, right? And so I developed a grade 12 course just on that called ethnomorphology. I made that up, though I did find out that there was a university course, third-year university course in sociology called ethnomorphology, and he had made that up too. And he reached out to me because, but changing societies is really what we're looking at. And in the course of that ethnomorphology course, I decided to base it on speaking and listening instead of reading and writing. So we had conversation groups, and I taught them how to listen through Goethean conversation.
Yeah. Because when you look at traditional or conventional school education, it's very much read what's in this book and write what's in this book on this piece of paper, and I'll mark whether or not you've got it accurate to the book or not. So then the teachers themselves are so detached because they've just got a criteria which is on a book to give to the student. So the students, that connection to the teacher's not there. The connection to the book's not there because literally it's just a memorization of text to text. So there's no connection in what they're doing. But when you speak, because I remember from school, one of the biggest things was, which really got on my nerves. I didn't realize it at the time, but after reflection, it did get on my nerves, is you couldn't ask questions that often. And when you ask questions which just slightly went against this sort of portrayal of what they were trying to say, what was portrayed in the book, then the teacher gets a bit aggravated at you, and then you end up getting in trouble. So there was no room for debate in the classroom at all. And you just sort of come out of school feeling more demotivated. And I know you said early on that it's about, you want the students to finish school feeling motivated. I know for a fact when I finished school, I didn't feel motivated by anything at all. And it's because of what they set me up for.
That's right. And that's, I often call that educational damage. And when I taught high school, both in non-traditional settings, like my living room, have the kids come after their traditional schooling into a class called ethnomorphology, which I held in my living room. I don't know if that would have been legal to do now. But, at one point when I was late with an appointment, I came and they had all arrived, all 18 of them had decided to make popcorn and were sitting in the kitchen because they weren't sure they were allowed. These are grade 12 students. They were allowed to come into my living room with food, so they decided to sit in my kitchen eating popcorn while they were waiting for me. I was an hour and a half late, and they all stayed. And what's interesting is the heart of all learning is in the soul. The heart of all learning is not in the head. It's not regurgitation, whatever the book is. It's not memorization and then regurgitation, which is what we often think learning is. That's knowledge. Okay, so I can learn just about everything by studying it, by taking it in, memorizing it, having little cues to memorize it. You know, I've also taught high school chemistry. So it was, you know, sometimes you have to learn the periodic table. I just took them into my ceramic studio and said, chemistry is color. Let's make some real chemistry going on here. And they got to invent some glazes. But I'm a potter also, so I could do that. I think the life force of learning from the perspective of the immediate moment, working with the unknown rather than knowing, has to be centered and fostered through student inquiry, which is what you're telling me didn't happen. So you're answering your own question around what is the difference. So my graduate thesis was called The Unfinished Lesson, Leaving Room for the Students, and it was based on student participation and student inquiry. And student inquiry is really seen in the constructivist movement, which is really fabulous. It's a form of really looking with and to and at the role of student questioning in a classroom. So you really lead with that. And that was great. But when you add Steiner to that, when you add Waldorf, insight and wisdom, which I call gnosis, 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 instead of knowledge with a K. But the root word of knowledge is gnosis, right? And so when you distill it down to that, you're saying, well, that's what is central to what is human in us. And what is human in us is this survival, need to survive. How do we survive well? Not by reading and writing and regurgitating. We survive when we hit upon the life force. So I opened all my high school classes up with a quote that is said to be from an anonymous source, but there's different arguments as to who said this first, but I'll say it now if you're interested. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. For what the world needs are people who have come alive. So Waldorf education is centered on helping people come alive inside themselves, whether it be through movement, through their heart and their head forces, always invoking what lives in the soul, and so that they can carry a level of responsibility for the world long after I'm gone. Hopefully, I'll say God willing, but that I go first, right? I've already lost a couple of my students, unfortunately, through car accidents and the like. But there is a place where I should be going first, and I want to leave the world behind. I want to leave people who have come alive. I think what you're reaching out in this podcast alternative is how have you come alive, and in various platforms and disciplines and thought forms. And to educate is, educare, if you bring that out, is to draw out, not push in. And I can't say that enough. There's a nice interplay of balance between giving and receiving, like the yin yang of education, right? And where's that middle point? I'm giving as a teacher, but I have to be receiving from my students. So I see it as a lemniscate of the light, the spiral of infinity, which is used by all kinds of movements, like the autism movement uses the spiral of infinity. So it's that figure eight sideways. Or it's like I'm giving to my students and I'm presenting something that might be interesting, hopefully interesting to them or to you right now. And then I receive it. I have to pause and receive the questions back, student inquiry, student participation. And then I take that up and it informs where I'm going now with what I'm going to go next. But I won't know where that is, like this podcast. So I'm like playing it, right? But you have to ask yourself, what's in the center of that? Where, if you were to what in the ceramic world, we call that the still point. It never really stops, though. Like the earth never really stops moving around the sun. Nothing. I'm an amateur astronomer too, so there's nothing is ever in stasis. It's always moving, and you think of us always moving, right? And we stick kids in a desk and expect them to sit still. We want them to be more intelligent. Excuse me. So in Waldorf, we often really work movement, especially in the morning. And in grade 1, that would look like what I would call a morning circle, but I'm still engaging in the times table, multiplication tables, but through their feet and their hands by clapping and stamping and moving. And by the time they're in grade 7, we're juggling times tables, okay? We're juggling the tables. And by the time we're in grade 8 or 9, we're going inside out, forwards and backwards with fast math in their heads, with somebody testing it on a calculator to see who's faster. I don't think I need to tell you who's faster. At a certain point, I'm not, in the day, like right now, what we're facing right now is computational intelligence through computers. All education pedagogy is being overrun with AI technology, and we have a tendency to think that handing kids a laptop or a tablet is kind of like the best way to go, and that teachers will be redundant. So what we're doing there is we're abandoning our children to technology. And I don't believe that technology necessarily has a heart. We might program it to have a heart, but it doesn't really have a human heart, right? Where is the love? Where is the love when I have a struggling adolescent high school student who is clearly struggling inside their hormonal selves? Where is the love that I'm going to hold them to? I had one whose mother actually dragged him by the ear to my classroom in grade 10. And I was doing a ceramics class that I involved the chemistry and the glazing in, and she had heard that like he had dropped out and he was not doing well in grade 10 and getting into drugs. And she literally dragged him up my driveway to my ceramic studio, because I was teaching grade 10 soapstone carving and clay class. It was a summer intensive for the kids. And he looked at me like, hold his hands, like, I'm not staying. I'm not staying. And I said, oh yeah, okay. So if you're not staying, I'm not going to give you anything to do in here. I'm just going to give you a pair of goggles. And I've got this huge piece of soapstone back on my carport and I need it smashed. Okay. So I'm going to give you a mallet and a chisel. And I need it, I want you to just smash it, but you have to wear the goggles. Because I'm going to give you something meaningful to do, because I know you're only here once and that's really a one-time thing. But we need to have pieces. So I show him how to do it. He smashed the crap out of this piece of stone that's huge, right? It's thousands of dollars, actually, I found out later. But anyway, so I pick up a piece and I said, oh, his name was Raven. And I said, Raven, oh my God, look at that. It looks like, what does that look like? And he said, well, it looks like a lion's head. And I said, it does. I wonder what it would look like carved. Well, I had not only this kid came back, but he was wanting to come in on Saturdays. He was I got him through high school and he's still connecting. So, and I've got a number of stories like that. And what that is he wasn't learning through his head. He needed to learn by smashing and taking his anger out and being allowed to smash something up. Well, what 15-year-old boy doesn't want to smash something up or blow something up? I'm sorry, right? Because they've got all that like juice that they want to do something with.
Yeah, it almost, well, it feels like when you look at conventional schooling, they're just teaching you I just said before, the knowledge. But what you're doing is teaching these people how to first find themselves and then how to connect with themselves to be able to go out and just learn by themselves. Whereas in the conventional system, you're sort of told, okay, read these books, then take this course, then get a job doing that, and that's you sorted. You're set, ready, and go. But what you're teaching people is anything can be learned. You can learn any way you want. It doesn't have to be sat down in a box classroom reading off a board. You can literally find yourself. And the example you just gave them was a different method that someone took, very sort of a niche method for that person in particular, and they found enjoyment out of it, and then you turned it into something of learning without that person feeling like they're being force-fed learning, and you touched that.
Yeah. I mean, and then through that, I had another boy who, again, was dyslexic. In high school, it was in grade 12, couldn't graduate because he didn't have his basics. And he was a mountain bike rider, and I live in the mountains. We live in the mountains here. And I said, but he was trying to get high school. And I said, so what are you riding on? And he said, the ground. I said, do you know what the ground is made out of? He said, rock. I said, do you know what kind of rock? He said, no. I said, granite. And nice, the oldest rock in the world. You know where that comes from? No. Oh. So we then started like what he's riding on as metamorphic rock that comes out of volcanoes. And now pretty soon, and what is igneous rock? And we went through the rock cycle. There, his science 10. Actually, it was science 11. Of course, I called Gaiosophy, but it was earth science in the conventional sense. And then he was getting ready to go down south to ride there. I said, what will you be riding on? He said, I found out it was sandstone. I said, that's a different ride. Why don't you find out what the difference is between riding on granite and riding on sandstone? Very different. It could break down from underneath you, right? So you better, recognize that the what you know will inform how well you ride. And this kid was so good that he was sponsored by some key bike companies. He was he was going into the nationals on this, but he needed his high school. And he just could not, he so struggled with the reading, writing aspect of schooling. He was into slam poetry. So I said, okay, well, if you write a slam poem based on your ride and what you've learned, then, I'll give you credit for that because I can. And if you need a scribe because you can't write it down, then you just say it to me, but do it so slow that I can type it fast enough. Slam poetry is fast, right? And so he did. He wrote a poem he called Gaiosophy that he performed in Vancouver and won first place in his slam poetry in his section, and dedicated it, of course, to me because he got through high school as a mountain biker in slam poetry. So I'm telling you, yes, we all learn. We're all beautifully diverse. And to funnel us and our learning into one little narrow box is to kill what is most human in us.
So how many students would you have in a typical class?
Well, that all depends. Like given that Waldorf Steiner education here is still considered alternative. It's not part and parcel with the public school system. I have had 8 kids in a class and 24 kids in a class and 32 kids in a class, depending on where and when I've taught. And I have taught in a lot of different schools, mostly in Canada. But the wedding I was just at, I taught in Idaho, and that was the class of 8 because they were a mixed group, and half of them went off to grade 9, sophomore in high school in the States, and the other half needed another year, and that's where I came in. And in high school, again, that changed as well because I was working online and I was working in person. We had both and/or. So we were a hybridized education. This is pre-COVID, but we were hybridized in working an online curriculum from distance ed or distance-based education, and then we were also doing classes like in my ceramic studio, and I was incorporating geology and chemistry and art all in one. So the other aspect of Steiner education is that we try to be as interdisciplinary as possible. So yeah, and I've created something I call the curriculum seal. That is my logo. You'll see on my website, I've got this sort of rainbow of colors with math, science, social, language, art, movement, so there are 7 streams and the subject goes in the center. And often in a classic situation, the teacher is at the center telling the students all about that one subject, right? Let's stay with biology because that's what I came up with earlier. So then I would tell them everything I knew about the cell or biology in that age group. And even in the Waldorf school, we have a tendency to do that in what's called main lesson. But we incorporate the arts and movement into that. And so we would try to really work with the spiral tendency of the plants because plants grow in spirals, most of them. And you can count them up for the leaf stem and all these fascinating things. And then, of course, do the, sketching of the rose bush or what have you, and painting. So you bring that into the arts. But then it occurred to me that just like education, there is many neurodiversity is behind everything. And so you could look at any subject, put that in the center of that seal and take it on a spin. So if you really want to know what I'm talking about, give me a subject I don't know about right now, anything. What's a subject that we could put in the center? And our audience needs to know this isn't pre-planned.
Yeah, nothing about this is pre-planned. Cars, maybe?
Okay, cars. Perfect. All right. So let's take cars, the automobile. So we're going to start with history and culture. What is the history of cars, of the automobile? When were they invented? How? In what country? Who? You could take it through the who, what, when, where, how kind of thing, but you're going into a cultural, historical moment in time where the automobile was invented. Okay. And there could be some names behind that. Henry Ford, for example, when did he start that? And you just take 1 or 2 biographies. And then you take it to, like, my parents were actually sports car racers. And so then you can take that into different aspects of history through racing cars to the fact that they, prior to having the automobile, people were in horses and buggies, and how that changed society when the automobile was invented. And what we're doing right now with electric cars, we're in that whole other dynamic. You can take that. Then you can drop that down to, let's take it to math. Well, my dad was one of those guys that could actually build and did build a car from the ground up. My grandfather was a mechanic. And he learned everything about cars. And when he was 16, he built his own car from the ground up. And when my brother was 16, he got to put 2 cars together, an MG and a Porsche, I think, and they combined them and created their own car.
Oh, nice.
He had a garage. Yeah, I know. He was the coolest kid, right? So the fact is that you can take this into math. You don't build a car without math. From the geometry of the form to the aerodynamic aspect of how you want a car to look so it doesn't hold back it's not a big box that's holding back the air that's causing more gas and petrol. But you go into the math of the design, or you could say the mechanics. So that's into physics now with the sciences. So we've started from history, sociocultural history, to math, to sciences. What are the physics of those pistons? And
even the movement of the car,
motor,
the wheels, like downforce, right, and all that as well.
So now we're going into a history of the sciences. Also, what is petrol or gas? What we call here petrol, and how does that fuel the car? And now is that turned to electricity? And what is electricity? We'll see how we're spinning it as one subject in the center. Is now we're covering history, math, sciences, because there are several in there. And now we'll go into the arts. It's like, what's your favorite kind of car? Draw your Lamborghini. Why, as compared to a BMW as compared to a Porsche. I'm going for the top ones, of course, but compared to the Hyundai or the Ford or whatever we've got going on here. And the cars through the ages, you could take that back into history and say, this is how they started out. And this is, in every car show, you'll see them. And then this is what we got now, like a little rocket ship happening, boom. And so you can model them, right? What else can you do with cars? Like artistically?
Artistically, well, you could, from what you've said there, you can interchange connects each of the one, because you can talk about the designs and how they've changed over time and why have they changed over time. Well, they've changed because of physics and to get more use of your petrol, to get more petrol out of your car. They change the aerodynamics of the car, which means they have to change the design of the car. And then there's obviously the other side of it where the certain lines in the car make the car just look nicer. And it's just having that compare and contrast to say, well, this one's not got the line, but this one does. And that's why it's nicer. So these sharp lines make cars look better.
Right. So it goes into the aesthetic appeal.
And with the arts as well, you can talk about how people modify cars. Like they might not even modify them to make it perform any better, but they want to make it look good. So yeah, they'll add like new alloy rims on it or something.
That's right, because we all like a little glamour in our lives to some degree, and then there they are. Like those got incredible rims. I even notice people's rims. It's like you should just get in and drive, right? But in a classroom context, if we were studying the history of the automobile, and I would take that through the science, the math, the language, then we move into the language. What are specific words that relate to the cars that might not be in ceramics, that might not be, like every discipline has its own language. If I talk astronomy with you, astrospeak, you might understand some of it and not others because it's unique to those people who are following, amateur astronomy, or what have you. So in the automobile industry, it's the same sort of thing, right? You can just say one word and everybody knows what you're talking about for people who are in that genre, right? And then, of course, so we've got language. You can also take car as a mechanical implement, right? And there are mechanics of language. There are mechanics of language. We call, the punctuation, the exclamation, you can relate that to stop, to period. We could go, question mark might be a road sign in the language that we see as a graphic image, meaning yield, but then proceed. That's called a semicolon. So I can connect that to language. And for kids who like cars and aren't getting the grammar, I can say, well, hey, let's come at it from the perspective of cars. A semicolon does this in real life. Because everything that human beings have invented has come out of need and life forces. So call on the life, not the death forces of it. That's what I say. Call on that. And so we've taken it now through cars, through backing it up to history, math, science, language, and art. That's 5. We've got 2 left, the social. And so how does the automobile enable us to be more social? Or what is the social component of the automobile? What would you say?
Is that more social impact? So the fact I can now drive over to Aaron's house and have a conversation with him. But then there's the other thing, I can go to a car meet and talk to 1,000 people who all I know share the same interest.
And there are a ton of podcasts out there, some pretty famous ones too, Car Speak, right? And that's what people want to listen to. So the social component unites people and creates community all around that subject. And we can take this in cars or zoology. Doesn't matter what subject, in the center of the curriculum. And so then to finalize the movement of that, and it can take it for a spin any which way, would be the movement, what every Waldorf school teacher tries to do with every subject, bring it alive through movement. So it kind of is, an oxymoron to say, okay, how does the automobile work with movement? But I'm going to say this, take it to the next level, not how does the automobile move, but how do we experience the movement of the automobile in us? How would I do that in a classroom? I might develop a go-kart contest. Okay. I might have them go into designing their own little go-kart and having a contest for the whole school, or maybe just for us, on the fastest or the slowest go-kart. Okay. So what are we? 4 walls. So I did this once. It was in the winter, and I think I was doing physics, but I did it in the school hallway, and they had to invent. They had some parameters around what they could use, but they had to invent something with 4 wheels that could either be pushed or would self-propel, and they had to be, no bigger, than this size or whatever. I forget what parameters I gave it, added some math in there, and so many centimeters by so many centimeters. And then some kids made it out of mouse traps, those little tiny wooden mouse traps. And some kids made it out of little cardboards, and we had a little race down the school hallway, right? This is that experience of creating something that includes all that learning, but the subject is automobile, but they've learned physics, math, language, right? They've learned the whole plethora, you could say, of an interdisciplinary form of teaching. So some kids are going to relate to the art, and other kids are going to relate to the physics, and other kids are going to relate to the language, because you've got difference when you've got a group of kids in a classroom. You're working with difference, not similarity. You don't want to funnel them into a bucket and have them all do the same thing. Back to your own education, and you want to work with diversity and difference.
So, with the what do you call it? Is it a circle? Is that what you call it?
I call it my curriculum seal, and I have it as a logo on my website, and I have articles on my website. I also have an online course on teaching into the future that it goes into depth in lesson 5 on the curriculum seal, because I've decided to bring all of this to teachers. And to me, to be the change that you speak about is to help teachers find the life force in everything they do, because the student in front of them is the life force, and you want to connect with that.
Do you have any advice for parents who may not have access to Waldorf education and want to sort of implement some of these things with their children?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually serve homeschooling parents across Canada and through the United States. I've had varying parents. In fact, one person from the UK reached out to me last month, and she was wanting to start a little homeschooling group with her kids and friends' kids. And so I would say yes. I have a personality quiz called the 4 temperaments. I would point them there first, because we not only work with neurodiversity in every Waldorf school classroom, but we're also working with what Steiner pulled from the 4 Greek temperaments, which became, Myers-Briggs and personality types. But a lot of them boil down to the 4 temperaments of personality. And when you understand them in yourself, and then you can understand them in your children, it's a teaching tool. So those 4 temperaments are called choleric, sanguine, melancholic, and phlegmatic. And when I understand the leading, not to box anything, but to recognize the tendencies, and that as adults, we usually have 3 of the 4 temperaments as tendencies, and we want to develop the 4th one that we're least of, so that we'll be well balanced. Behind all Waldorf education lies the human being, And it's not about specialization, but diversification that the Waldorf is about, because kids will, if they're too specialized, this is another thing we've done to kids, is we've over-specialized. And then we don't leave them with enough, what I call the back pocket, to dip into when that specialty goes away for one reason or another. Right. And so what is that? What's in that back pocket for them to pull out? And so parents can access me through Teaching into the Future and pull some of my free articles on the curriculum seal. They could take an online course. And I've had several parents together take an online course. I'm working with a high school faculty right now that wants to go into farm schooling high school. So, yeah, so I was Zooming with them last week in designing a curriculum seal curriculum for the farm, but also includes the humanities, the sciences, the maths, and the histories. And they had a teacher for each, but all based on what lives and works and weaves in the farm.
Yeah, which is so much on the farm that you can go into.
Yeah, so these were, some of them were teachers, some of them were nurses, like one was a nurse, but they were all very interested in basing the high school in a homeschooling capacity on a farm, working farm, biodynamic farm.
What's your approach when I know we did touch on technology earlier, but what's your approach with technology in when you are teaching? Well, I mean modern day technology, as in computers, AI, Google, everything that's basically at the in your phone right now.
Yeah, good question. That's the question as far as, I mean, let's look at, so it's called computational learning, and everything is being directed to computational learning. And so if you were to walk into a public school right now, the teacher has had to learn to stay one step ahead of the students, but basically they hand out the tablets and then they tell the students to follow certain links. So the role of the teacher is very different, right? We're letting this computers be the teachers. And there's been some very interesting content that's going into that. A friend of mine is running an online school that's really based on developing curriculum online. And as you know, I did that for 10 years. And so I was able to see both what works and what doesn't work about it. So I think computers are a tool, and that when they're utilized, first with, let's almost work with computer civics. So what is the morality? What are the ethics behind using computers? How to teach the kids how to surf the net safely. You teach them to look for the URL. Where is it coming from? Number one. But kids don't know that. They're 12 years old. They're 9 years old. They don't have the discernment that an adult might have, or somebody that didn't necessarily grow up with it has. So they're not looking for that kind of discernment. So I would, computer civics would have to come in first to just, and to always take it on the spin that human beings developed this. Go into the Alan Turing story. Human beings developed computers. They didn't develop us. So, call it Take Back the Night or what have you, but keep it human-centric. Because when I looked at it, and I've got a little video called The Tin Man and the Human Heart, when I was first really looking at the algorithms that were being doled out to kids in particular. They're not interested in people and adults anymore. We've got way too much discernment. They're looking at kids. Okay, so algorithms are designed to be focusing on that 12-year-old or that 15-year-old, right? Or that now 10-year-old. It's dropping further and further down. And what's happening is they're basing so many what's called the knowledge economy. So we are now no longer pedagogy, but we're working with the economic factor of feeding money, economics of education, the economics of knowledge. So that's welcome to algorithms. Let's just funnel us forward. without really thinking about it. So I would teach the kids how to think. Because we all think, but we don't really think if we're just going from one algorithm to another.
Exactly. And earlier when you were talking about educational damage, are you also seeing that you're getting a lot of students that also have technological damage where their life's just been taken over by TikTok? Because that's a lot of the younger generation.
Yes, TikTok, Snapchat, and gaming. I've had girls and boys really as gaming addicts. My own nephew stands as one of them, I think. And he's in his late 30s now, but his life is central to the game and the screen, a wall full of screens, right? He's big in the gaming world, but doesn't have friends, right? So the aspect of what damage can be caused by technology when when it hasn't been harnessed, when it hasn't been really worked with, and it's very difficult. But there are camps for kids to actually get them unaddicted to their screens. But the unplugged is really important. There are other high schools that have recognized now, public and private, that have really recognized the danger of being plugged in all the time. So cell phones get put into a box and only taken out when at lunch and then put back in order to be at that school. And those kids have to sign an agreement towards that. Okay. So in trying to look at that, but those are kind of few and far between. We're not talking about the masses and the major public systems out there that are, just trying to cope with the differences. But now we have the knowledge economy jumping into the school system. I mean, when you think about it as a business person, it's a lot of possible income if you're going to be targeting on, kids whose parents give them money or have money, who can make money online, and continue to do so with the strongest focus being screen time, rather than their own daily life, right? So, and what is in their daily life, as long as there's a balance. So for me, computer ethics would be all about that, where you're working with your physical body. You sitting? So is your right finger or your left, depending on what hand you use, is that what is getting the most action going on here? Or, and how do you work with your heart? You're hanging out with your friends? Or what are you doing when you're with your friends? Are you standing in high school today, at least in Canada? The kids stand wall to wall on their phones so people can walk through, and they can text the person next to them, but they're not talking. That's a norm now. So, but as a teacher and an older person in life, I would say, what I can see and say is alarming. But I also can say, okay, so what is the good of this? How do we enter into that rabbit hole and get ourselves back out? I find that a lot of the kids in their 20s, and you might be in that category in your 30s, at a certain point have learned, okay, this isn't fun anymore. I'm going to go take a pottery class. I'm going to go jump off a cliff. I'm going to go do something else, because taking themselves through the rabbit hole and back, they pulled themselves out. But we all have an addiction to our phones.
Yeah.
Most of us do.
I did see this thing and it really sort of stuck with me, and definitely my generation, because I can definitely vouch for it. I grew up at a time where, as I was growing up, the computers were becoming more prominent in the house. So whenever we went online, we would sit down at the computer and go online. And if we wanted to go offline, we would turn the computer off and go offline, and then we was away from the internet. But now we're constantly connected to the internet, no matter where we are, no matter if we've just woken up, no matter if we're 1,000 miles away from our house, we're still connected to the internet. And it made me think, like, back then we used to use the internet, we used to use technology, but now it's looking like technology uses you. And if you're a kid coming up now who's constantly not had that experience of disconnecting from the computer, and they've had that their experiences 100% online 100% of the time, they're just all going for it, they've not had that experience of this is how you can walk away and this is how nice it feels to walk away. We've got that nostalgic feeling where we can turn it off and go and play outside with our friends. These guys coming up that don't necessarily have that experience and that nostalgia.
So I would say we need to activate the head, heart, hands. We have to activate other things. So in Waldorf schools, back to Waldorf Steiner schools, we would teach them how to knit, carve wood, work with clay or stone or felt or fabric or pretty much any art form. To me, if I were to nail it to anything and not have a Waldorf school to turn to, I would turn everything towards the arts and any arts, music, dance, physical sort of form arts. But because you think about what the arts offer, right? They offer.
You're literally creating something in the arts.
That's right. You're working with what is commonly called the muse, and what the Greeks called the 9 muses, right? There were 9 of them, and they were all in different aspects. And so, but what does art really offer when you're working with it? You're working with the unknown because you might not know how it's going to turn out. Okay. Even if you're working on a prescribed vision of creating, I'll take cars because we talked about it, a model of a car, and that could be seen as a craft, but the crafts also lead to the arts in thinking when you're picking up every little piece and realizing that's a fender, that's a bumper, that's a steering wheel. Wow, look at the shape, look at the form, look at the geometry of this. And I'm going to assemble it. I mean, Lego went to this degree that it went to for children and is still number one because of that level of what you can form and create. So I would say to parents right now, don't wait till they're 16 and they call me to say my kid is addicted. What do I do about it? It's pretty hard at 16 to turn a kid who has been online since they were 5 and left alone with it and told that it didn't, they were just kind of left alone with it because parenting is stressful. It is stressful. It's one of the hardest jobs there is in the whole wide world, I would say. And how do we work with other human beings, especially our own, with that degree of balance and control and yet freedom, and sometimes we have a tendency out of what we think of as love to give too much freedom to our kids to explore the internet. And sometimes then we try to pull it away and then it's like an addiction. You're pulling this away and it's too much. But I have had parents call me. I've said, bring on the arts, and what is there. And they've tried different things. Oh no, that didn't work. Ceramics didn't work. I enrolled them in an art class. No, that didn't work. Music. All right. Okay. Well, get a drum set. She said, oh no, not drums. I said, well, what do you want more? So the fact is that at a certain point, arts, like life, are full of life and have a muse behind it and work invisibly. And so whether it be, a tune or a beat that's beginning to take over, this need to play or strum or pick or point or whatever, out of any number of the arts, I feel is really humankind's salvation, to borrow a word from the Christian etiquette. It's like it is we are at now. I believe that we're at this crossing point for humanity right now, and I'll spend the rest of my living breath talking about the most important thing, which is us, which is to be and retain our humanity. And that means to speak from and work from the heart, not the head as much. We've leaned everywhere towards this industrialized, computerized, technologicalized, reductionist point of view, deductionist point of view from the 1600s on, right? And so we've cornered ourselves. And now AI is getting stronger. But I asked in the Tin Man and the Human Heart, what what is bigger than AI? Because we're told that the Internet of all things is going to help us. Or talk to Elon Musk. We just need a brain implant. We need smart glasses. We need this. We need this to be smart. We're going to have the computer embedded. Well, if you've listened to anything I've said today, of which I don't have any of those smart things, we can train our minds and our hearts to be more alive than the Internet of all things, because that is limited. The Internet of all things is limited to what human beings put into it. And love is bigger than the Internet of all things and the metaverse. The metaverse is contrived.
Well, it's artificial, isn't it? It's not necessarily real. It's imaginative. It's what we've created.
So you've said it right there. You know, Einstein, one of my favorite quotes by Einstein is, if you want children to be more intelligent, if you want them to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. And if you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. And if you want them to be even more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. And so what we're saying is the story, the human story and human imagination is what has sucked us into that rabbit hole in the first place around the metaverse and gaming, and to bring us back out, again, a bigger imagination. So when I've worked with addiction and kids who are full-time gamers to the point of losing everything else, it's like you have to go into the imagination, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, to come back out of the imagination. And Waldorf schooling, Steiner schooling is built and based on the power of imagination. And so my online course, didn't realize I was making a plug for that, but I am. But my online course, which I got on Teaching into the Future, is called The Impact of Teaching Through Story. And it goes into the power of our own story in order to work with the story of anyone else. And we know from the economics of all branding today, whether you're looking at the Nike check mark or anything else, we're looking at the story that lives behind everything. And that has been the leading factor in humans educating and teaching our young for millennia. I work with the Mohawk in Canada, in Mohawk-inspired, Mohawk immersion Waldorf-inspired school in the Six Nations territory south of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I've been working with them for years, and I've been so amazed because they've carried the same story repeatedly for the years, throughout the years. And they all have another aspect to it. When they get a little older, they do it again, and they do it deeper and again and a little deeper. And I think we can all learn from that, rather than new stories constantly that puzzle the mind.
You know, I guess that's why these ancient societies had these myths and legends that have lasted for so long, like they've lasted thousands of years, and they're still told to this day because of how powerful those stories are and how consistent they've stayed.
And you have to say, okay, and they go up to the sky. Every culture around the world has stories of the constellations that we're looking at. So I was always interested because, you know, when I map out the constellations and the galaxies, as to what the Chinese might have called what we might call the Big Dipper, or the Great Bear in some indigenous circles, or you know, a variety of different constellations having a very similar story told in a different culture has been fascinating to me, right? And so where do those stories unite with what it means to be human and standing here looking up at the sky? And in a way, as I said, that's the metaphor for me for education. We're looking into the unknown, but we have to recognize, and we have to leave room for the unknown in the known while we're teaching. and that is usually in the hearts and the minds of the students through inquiry. And then to have them participate in their own learning rather than just sit and get, which is also altogether too common today. You sit, I'll give, okay? Then you memorize and give it back to me. That's, yeah. Then I go home thinking I've done something.
You mentioned Myths and the Stars. We had a chap on the podcast a few months ago called David Matheson. Is that right? Yeah. And he's spent years researching how these ancient myths correlate with the stars and how myths from India, myths from China, and myths from the Middle East all relate to each other because of the constellations in the sky. So,
oh my God, I've got to listen to that.
You're really interested in that podcast.
I really would be. Yes, I'll look for it. I'll look for it. What was it called?
It's called Universal Myths Explained by the Stars.
Okay, I'll listen to that today. Thank you. Awesome. And so in the field of education, when you base everything on a story, you've got what we call the hook, right? We all love stories. And some of these stories, like you said, Pam, are so old. They're so ingenious almost that they're seeds for the future. So my website, Teaching into the Future, to me is all about what kind of seeds can I leave so that when I'm no longer in this physical body, those seeds are planted and can continue to grow in people like you and the people like all the kids I've taught. And how does that happen in their lives? We want to continue to grow this planet and grow this consciousness that we have. We want to grow up. Right now, I think we're at our almost pre-pubescent state of humanity, right? We're still thinking that we're in control, A. B, we're playing cops and robbers and guns. If you look at what's going down in Gaza right now and in the Sudan, anywhere in the world, really, it's just terrible. And it's a matter of, well, what, and usually out of, I work with also some trauma therapists, and it's the story, that imaginal reality that Einstein is really talking to, building the power of our imagination, which can create a new world. We have to first believe it and see it. We have to first, then we teach it. But we have to become it. And that's my clown mind in the classroom idea. And so for me, it's not about being clowns. It's not about being a circus, turning the classroom into a circus. I've done that. It's kind of fun, grade 6, Middle Ages, do a circus. But the clown mind is all about how do we play with our thinking? How do we play with human history? Curriculums. How do we play with language? How do we play with diversity and find unifying still point of what it means to be human? That is the still point. That's the rest. That's the pause that schooling should be a part of. And as we're in movement, we're always in movement. So as a potter, I'm on the wheel and everything is spinning and I'm going through a play of opposites. I'm raising it horizontally, back down, higher, lower. So expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, every way. Finally, I get the thing centered. Well, I'm breathing. Think about it. Expansion, contraction. Lungs are doing just that right now.
Literally meditating, whilst you're doing it.
So
meditative state whilst you're doing it.
It's wonderfully centering. That's why I call it clay therapy. And but we can do that in the classroom. I teach teachers to do that in the classroom because it's a stressful job. Not only do you have diverse kids and neurodiverse kids, you've got a curriculum that you have to answer to. Then you've got their parents who are worried, who want your time after or before school. Then you've got to prepare a curriculum. Then you've got to, you've got to hold so many balls. You have to learn to be a juggler. And you have to, so when I work with Clown Mind, it's about how do you play what comes towards you and bring it back, and how do you breathe through this? And the other aspect of working with contraction and expansion, the very aspect of what it means to be human and to breathe, we stop doing that, we're dead. Think about it. So how do we stay alive in the classroom, and how do we keep that going for our students? And there's that pause. And so by playing this a little bit, you're really working from the inside out. As you are on the wheel, again, the metaphor of being a potter, you're centering, you're going expansion, contractions. Then you go from the opening the inside, so opening the hole, and then moving it out from the inside out in the classroom. And then you build the walls. Same thing in the classroom. You go into the connection with the student from the inside out. Who are you? I see you. I see you love soccer. Great. Let's take that into, and you hate math. I wonder how I could figure out how I could teach this kid the connections between math and soccer with the defense, right? With what have you. And so you're working from that place of connection, that still point, and you're bringing it out. The other inside out part is you're working with the heart, which is, again, I see you.
So how difficult do you find working with a class of, because in the UK, the average classroom size is probably around 30 students. How difficult do you find working with a group of 30 students and trying to find the individuality of each student and sort of tap into that?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I find the more students I have, the easier it is, which is a funny thing, right? It's the opposite of what you would expect. People go, oh, there's only 8 kids in the class. That's great. It's like, no, that's not great. I'm working so much harder with 8 kids than I am with 28 kids. 32. Okay. And the reason for that is that they work with each other. I pinpoint the leaders in the class, and I get the meeting out of the corner of the palm of my hand, and I got the rest of the group. Boom. I also work with the 4 temperaments. So I pull out the cholerics, who are full of fire, and they're natural born leaders, right? And they need to be respected, and I make sure they know they are respected by me. Whereas another child who might be more sanguine, they just need they need to be loved. And I'm condensing everything now, and recognize I'm blanket condensing it. There's so much more inside this seed, but I'll just say it for the sake of this answer. And then I might work, and that air child, that sanguine child, just needs to know they're loved. So, and I let them know, I give them a wink and a smile, and sometimes a pat on the back, physically, pat, right? Because they need to know that. They don't care about respect so much as love. And then I've got the melancholic, who is that critical thinker in the group, right? Who goes deep and hard for deep, okay? And is beautiful, and is a researcher, okay? And is somebody who wants the truth behind things. Welcome to alternative. But, so I see them too, and I recognize it's not so much respect. They respect themselves, they'll give it when they want to. They won't when they don't. That's it. I recognize that. But what they need is they need to trust me, because they don't trust. And so they need to trust me. And how do I get their trust? I mean, how do you get their trust? You let them know that you've been through a few hard knocks yourself. When they're in a melancholic state and they want to just close in on themselves and contract, you don't get them to expand by telling them that they need to come out of their little cave or their depression or whatever you're talking about. You don't get them that way. You get them by going in there with them and telling a story about that hard story about somebody, who made it through. Nobel Peace Prize laureates made it through. Some real incredible people around the world who have served humanity have made it through. And giving them the light at the end of the tunnel. And then you've got other kids, and those are the earthy kids, those like rock. And And the other, the phlegmatic, is that most loyal kid in the class. They will be the Sam to the Frodo if you're going Lord of the Rings, because I really think that's a really prime example of a phlegmatic who will just indomitably follow and be faithful to you. But they're looking for loyalty in return. They need to know that you are standing right there, you have their back, and that you will be faithful to them. And that you will, for them, that means predictability. They love to be predictable in a way the sanguine doesn't like to be predictable. So you have to balance all this out in a class of 32 children. You can say, I'm going to make sure I address these 4 things: love, trust, loyalty, and respect. Boom. And then you've got them. I've had kids eating out of my hand to the point where when I've left, this was now Toronto, one of the last times I taught a grade 6 Waldorf Steiner school. When I left, they circled my car and sang a Miley Cyrus song, then called a radio station to say goodbye as I'm driving across Canada. It was a 5-day trip. Be like you guys go to Portugal or something, but a 5-day drive back, and dedicating this song to me, and then flying out and getting their parents to come and see me in BC. Why? Because, and there were 28 kids in that class. Why did I get that? Because I listened, I saw them, I worked with them, they participated, I ran the curriculum seal through everything I taught them. I let them surprise me with what they were going to do with it. I didn't think I knew everything. Clown mind. A clown has to come on stage and there's no script, right? They have to be so present. They put on their little red nose and they have to be authentic more than anything. Think about it. Present and authentic, and work with the props at hand with what they've got coming at them. It's all improvisational. And I'm looking and talking about starting a new teacher training for Waldorf teachers, and it'll be mostly online with residencies, and that's still in the works. But if it happens, clowning will be in the curricula for teachers so that they learn how to be present and authentic and work with improv. And then we would slowly move that into a classroom situation. That's how I learned.
So, this Waldorf education sounds amazing and great. Like, you're managing to understand each child and sort of hone into what is going to help them learn the best, and not only learn the best individually, but learn the best as a group. Why isn't this being implemented in sort of the mainstream sort of schooling system?
Exactly. I would say there's a lot of myths about Waldorf education. They don't learn to read in grade 1. It's like, that's number one myth. The other is that they can't wear black or use black. There's just these weird, whenever you're met with something alternative, you're going to get some camping out going on. Those camps that say, ooh, they're against something, so therefore we have to defend it. A trial. Yeah. Steiner's gone under, what's the word? Gone under the gun for racism, and which is crazy. But in the Netherlands, Steiner education is free. And so the Netherlands government decided to spend 1 year researching everything Steiner had to say about everything. And he had a lot to say about education, medicine, architecture, agriculture, so many aspects of human endeavor. And he was a, wise, clairvoyant, wise man with something to say. And they came up after 1 year, an extensive research that no, Steiner was not a racist. But if you took any number of his one-liners out of something, out of context, you could say in today's terms that could be racist, but
right.
it's completely.
Which you can do to anyone, right? At this stage, you can make anyone a racist by taking.
That's right. So it's kind of, I might be considered a transphobe, right? Because have questions about gender dysphoria for 15-year-old girls going through what's called male affirming surgery. That's another podcast, okay? Because I've just researched it, and I've spent a year researching that alone because of one of my former high school students who went through this, and at 27 regretted it deeply. And so the question of why did 85% of our female youth for gender dysphoria why is that being targeted, that age group, already vulnerable about their sexuality, and mostly females? Why do 85% of gender dysphorics are 15-year-old females?
Did you find out the answer from your research? Because it's a really good question.
Well, I worked with Kathleen Stock, who's from the UK, and you can look up her work. One is called Material Girls, Why Reality Matters for Feminism, and she's under the gun, right? As is Steiner, for just saying why, the genders are actually based in reality. And I would get coined as a transphobe for saying these things, because you can't say anything other. You can't bring something to the table and just talk about it. And I'm interested in talking about it, but for the record, I'm a lesbian. I'm in the LGBTQ community, and I have been all my life. But that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a teacher and I'm concerned about my 15-year-old girls who are male affirming surgery, otherwise called double mastectomies. So we're going into a new little dark camp over here, but the fact is that Steiner has had, in answer to your question, Aaron, why isn't it more widespread? Well, it became widespread in Germany and the Netherlands because it's public. It's akin to public education, but you can pull some things out of context, and it sounds pretty alarming. Back in context, he's talking about the evolution of humanity that also goes through a series of reincarnated abilities. So I might have been a male man of color in another world, another in ancient history. And that is now me now, a cisgendered white woman in Canada. So to recognize that we try on different colors and different genders, because that's what we need for this incarnation, to grow and evolve as humans. And all of us are growing and evolving together. So to zoom back in through all the possible places we could go with this, into why is it not understood. One is that the myths, even in my own hometown, which is a town of 10,000, if you brought up the word Waldorf, they'd say, oh, they can't wear black and they don't know how to read. I've taught 4 grade 1s, and believe me, they learn to read. What they're doing is I have a little book that I'm now just becoming free on my website, and I designed it with the illustrations came from one of my students who co-created this alphabet with me when I was going back to grade 1, and she was 14 or 15 and just finished with me, and a great artist. So we collaborated on what I wanted, and we kind of did that together. She's now a professor, got her PhD in literature, and is a professor in women's studies in a university in Canada. The other, then I took that alphabet and played with it for a series of cycles in Waldorf classrooms. And then I decided I probably wouldn't teach grade 1 again, and I wanted to write a story for my friends' children who were 5 and 6 years old. So I did that with another student who came through, and she was now 20 something, and she's from Idaho, just at her wedding. And she came through, and I put all the alphabet out, and I said, let's make a story. So we co-created this amazing story together that then 10 years later, I pulled it back and turned into a little book so that teachers and students and parents can have this. It needs a little help because I'm not very technologically advanced, but it's got audio and text, little storybook. The core of why Steiner isn't developed, I would say, is also at the fault of people who started it were largely German, and they had a certain modality of execution for Waldorf, and it was going to be, and in my way of thinking, I might be under the fire for this because these people were very good people who had a lot of wisdom to bring, but it was a bit closed, Eurocentric, formulated. And the Waldorf movement is coming out of that, the auspices of that. And some people are, what my mother would say, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which would be they're throwing out anthroposophy and Steiner and keeping what they think of as Waldorf. That is happening in the UK right now. And I instead of that, I'm the one that goes into anthroposophy and says, well, you have to understand what this is about here. You have to understand that the core of this is about being alive, of which we've just talked about, and being human on this swirling planet where we're working with the play of opposites in a very big way, dark and light, yin and yang. And we need to come together as humans, really, and meeting AI technology that wants to turn us, I'll borrow from Star Trek, the cyborg. And so wants to put things, implant things into our brains to say, now we can be more intelligent. We can actually be computers.
Well, that sounds like, from everything you've told us in this past hour and a half, it sounds like humanity and our spirit is at the soul, like the center of the foundation of Waldorf. So you can't remove that and still have Waldorf. Doesn't sound possible.
It's impossible, but so Steiner's gone under fire for that, and also our movement has limited itself. I would say it hasn't been neurodiverse enough, and is rightly under fire for that. But to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to throw Steiner out and keep Waldorf, you can't. In my view, you can't have Waldorf, true Waldorf, without that. I train and evaluate teachers. Waldorf teachers, as well as bring. I'm working on a book called Trade Secrets, and the first online course, The Impact of Teaching Through Story, is just one aspect of that. All that is informed out of anthroposophia. I'll take the feminine derivative because that's how Steiner first intended it to be. And how do we catch that? The role of imagination is being the most human quality that we can possibly give and share with our students. Trying to remember the name of a book. Alberto, he was a South American writer. I'll come up with it later if you need it. Anyway, he, in his research, decided that, well, why did humans actually rise to the top of the chain? Why is it us that didn't get eaten by saber-toothed tigers, right? What is it about being human that is human? And he distilled his findings into 2 words: imagination and collaboration. And he hypothesized that at one point, a group of humans, instead of getting eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, decided to collaborate, make a bunch of noise, and scare the saber-toothed tiger off its kill as a group with noise. Now, a few of them might have gotten killed in the process, but they kept at it. Imagination, first somebody to think about the idea, and the other to actually act as a group, not alone, but as a group. To me, Waldorf education is central to, not Waldorf, all education needs to work with imagination and collaboration. So whether your listeners are parents, teachers of any system, because I've got podcasts that are geared for teachers of any discipline. I've got 17 podcasts right now, and you can see they're not specific to Waldorf teachers. but they're specific to having a human-centered learning in a human-centered classroom. So I'm not sticking tablets in front of the kids. I'm evoking their imagination, and I'm instilling collaboration on every level in my classrooms and in the classrooms of the teachers that I work with. And those podcasts are central to all of much more of what I can say. So they're called Integral Teaching, and they're on every platform. Have a listen.
Yeah, we'll check them out. Is there a way for teachers in mainstream schooling to implement? They might have their hands tied a little bit, but is there a way for them to implement Waldorf techniques in those classrooms?
Absolutely. So that's why I put the podcast together. I did them because I put them together before COVID, but especially after COVID. I've worked with public school systems. I've worked with secondary professional development. I've got a couple of testimonials on my website for that. I've done Zoom calls with faculties that either the pedagogical advisor or the ED executive directors of those schools, those principals, have hired me to do one Pro-D session. And in that Pro-D for public school at any level, and I roll out the curriculum seal in neurodiversity, even though they're a math teacher teaching grade 10 math. I say, if you want to catch every student, then you find the language, you find the art, you find the science, and you'll catch every student. The other is the 4 temperaments, like I just shared with you. And you work, so that's in one way. Those don't belong in a way to Steiner. They are utilized by Steiner schools, but they belong to humanity, and they've been at work within humanity for centuries. Another book I would recommend would be Looking with the Unseen, and the power of it would be David Epstein, the sensuous soul, the soul of the sensuous, and another one. Range by I think Range was David Epstein. Sorry, you can't use this, but those books are not necessarily Waldorf school books. But at the end of the day, what Steiner gave to Waldorf education was insights into what it means to be human and insights into teaching humans. So whether you're a public school, elementary, or a secondary teacher, junior high, whatever you call them in the UK or around the world, you can work with the aspect of connection and any level of the arts, any level of thought, heart, and participatory action in your classrooms to instill what is most human within your students and within you. It doesn't just belong to Steiner.
Yeah. Have you noticed an increase in school teachers that are interested in this way of teaching?
Well, because I have a website and Teaching to the Future, people find me like you found me. So people with an interest will find me, and sometimes they find me through my podcasts, sometimes through my website, others through word of mouth. And so, it's a kind of odd question because it's a globalized world now.
We've become more globalized, so you have seen.
And when I look at the algorithms for my podcasts, I had somebody listening in Iraq. It's like, wow. And I've got quite a lot in Beijing. But I have worked with a teacher in China, but in Guangzhou, not in Beijing. So I don't know how that happened, but and so if you Google alternative education or maybe Waldorf or Steiner, you might find me somewhere along the line. And so, yes, I'm currently working with a variety of teachers, and I'm way behind on my own podcasts. So it's spinning a lot of wheels here. And I think what is my driving force right now is to create a teacher training for all teachers, whether they're public or Waldorf, and use the trade secrets I have just talked about here, some of which I have just talked about here. It's too big of a subject to go into all of.
Will the teacher training be a self-paced one where they can just do it at their own in their own time?
Well, do you know the book Slow? It's, the slow cooked education. It's just called Slow. And to me, I've been thinking about that. We have a tendency to want to finish things and accomplish things faster and faster. And there's another book called Faster and Faster, but I read a lot. But there is, I have this idea that it should be paced so that teachers who take it can be active practicing teachers, and they can also have lives and live them too, right? And so that they shouldn't give up every weekend and several nights a week, in a teacher training. So what if instead of it finished in 2 years, it took 5 to get there? But they were actively practicing it, and then everything that they were learning, they could practice. It would be almost like the word mentorship, Erin, that you mentioned earlier, and of the martial arts disciplines of the mentors or masters, that it would be something like that. I would, when I'm doing my work, I want to be working myself out of a job, that they no longer need me. And I have a lot of teachers who said, could I just have you a pill in my back pocket? It's like, no, honey, that pill is going to be inside your heart, and you won't need a pill. You won't need a pill to feel better. You won't. You'll actually find imagination deep inside of you that pops out at every opportunity. And you'll be so deeply inspired by the kids that you teach that you'll know what to do next. And you're going to be reaching deep into the future to work out of an intuitive knowing that they're on the right path. So imagination, inspiration, and intuition as the next higher, in a way, what we're all reaching for as a humanity, can inform our teaching practice.
It is literally the saying of give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, or teach a man to fish and he'll eat forever. You're doing that with the educational system to say, but if you're doing it on such a big basis that so many people can learn to think and learn themselves, and then go out there and do the same thing to the next generation and then the next generation, and then suddenly you've got great progress being made by everyone. Instead of the way AI and technology is taking over everything, everyone's got very, very lazy, because you can just do everything that you need to do to satisfy your needs all on your phone.
Well, I tried out Chatbot 4 myself. I was writing an article and I tried it out and I went, oh my God, is this the best they can do? Really? So and then, I want it written in the line now of one of my favorite authors. I'm not going to say it out loud, but and then it was like, oh yeah, you know what? That is not coming from my heart. That's just like putting another thing into the world. It's just noise, pollution. We don't we don't want to do that. We want to be integral. That's why I called my podcast Integral Teaching. So we want to teach out of our integrity. I don't want to give my integrity away. That's like giving the most precious thing I've been given away. And I don't want any one of my students to feel that they have to sell themselves to either make money, to have a relationship, to be, I would say at the end of the day, I want my students to recognize, and all the teachers I work with, so that they work with their students, that self-abandonment is part and parcel to the way we were taught and to our current educational standards and practices. Because we're then going for something that we think is out there that can be taught to us. We come from the inside out. We come out of our interest, our curiosity. We come out of the life force that is the nub of everything that is alive. Out of that plant, that plant nodal point. So when a nodal point happens in a plant, it can offer a new little stem and flower, and then leading to the flower and the fruit. right? And so it's constantly growing. And what is the nodal point? Well, it can't happen without sun and water and earth, right? So how are we grounding our students into informing, into going deeper into who they are, rather than losing themselves into a world that they get lost in? And, I don't know about what's happening in England, but in my small town of Nelson, British Columbia, we have a huge drug problem. And our small town has 6 traffic lights. And you're going to find a lot of people on drugs on every street corner. And I know, like in many cities, it's true in many parts of the world. And so the mental health and mental health resiliency is now at the core of my interest. And how do we create and sustain a level of mental resiliency, heart resiliency, emotional stability, emotional intelligence, and then active practices where we're not so fatigued that we can't work. I've hired several 20-year-olds and I can outwork them. And why is that? It should be going the other way around, actually. Yeah. So I'm going to mute while I get this phone off.
Yeah, no, that's good that you're going down the mental health side of things, because I do see that being, especially, it is bad in England, but especially when I look at the US, just through entertainment and media, that there's a pill for everything. Oh, you feel a bit down today, go and get a pill. Oh, you feel, even if you're a bit too happy, oh, go get a pill, you need to calm down a little bit. And everyone's just got a pill for everything. So no one's learning how to handle their emotions in any way because there's a pill for it. But I'm kind of like against pharmaceuticals altogether, just through all sorts of reasons. And if I'm ever feeling down, then I look at, okay, what's the problem? Is it my diet? Have I eaten something which I don't usually eat, which is causing me to feel this way? Have I not had enough sleep? Have I not in my normal routine properly? Well, there's loads of different factors, but it's that process of thinking about multiple different reasons why I might be feeling down for that day is being replaced with other people by going to get a pill. Oh, I've got pills in my drawer. Let me just take one of these. I feel down. I love this. And it's that cycle.
And we go to a doctor, they do the same thing. Here's a pill. Yeah. And sometimes that pill is just going online and playing a game and just, divorcing ourselves from so-called physical reality in order to get into an imaginal one that is more of the metaverse than anything. But I would say when we recognize, and it's not like I'm wanting to not paint this picture that we need to be Luddites and go back and away from technology. I mean, look, I get to meet with you now and you're in the UK. Isn't that cool? Yeah, and I get to see you too, not just talk with you over the phone. And so technology has been, it should be at the service of humanity. But as soon as I give up my power to think and imagine and write into chatbots, I mean, it might be great if I needed to make a grocery list or something. Hey, but at a certain point, when we give up our own imaginal power, when we give up our own autonomy, and we're working with algorithms, it's just easier. We get lazier and lazier. But, if back to your question, Aaron, back to, how I would work with technology in the classroom, it depends on the age group. I wouldn't bring it to the early grades. They don't need it. I wouldn't hand a grade 1 student a tablet. I don't want to live in a world where a grade 1 student who is still learning to be in themselves, I would be working from the inside out there. And that grade 1 student needs a lot of bilateral movement. Another UK neuro, she's a neurologist, I think, Sally Goddard Blythe. And years ago, she wrote a book. She had her kids in the London Waldorf school. And she realized that what they were doing in the Waldorf school was so important for cognitive brain development that she wanted to write about it. So she wrote The Well-Balanced Child. And she's since gone on to research and write. You'll find her on LinkedIn. So it's a shout out for Sally Goddard Blythe. And but in so doing, you want to really work with bilateral development. If you want to work with intelligence, imagination, bilateral development. So I tell my grade 1, 2, and 3 teachers to do obstacle courses every single day before they start their day. Gets the kinks out on every level, right? So imagine as 2, 8-year-olds, if you were brought to school and you had to climb the trapeze, you had to belly crawl, you had to balance on a balancing board or wire. You had to do all those things physical with a bilateral movement, how you would have arrived inside of your body before you were ever stuck in a desk and given some mad minutes or something.
Right. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. And so, but when we did bring in computers, which I would do at around at the 12-year-old age for sure, and I would teach them the ethics of what it is to Google and surf and what you're going to find, and then a little bit of the light and the dark aspects of that. Try out chat, try out yourself, but instead of being wowed by the chat bot, was like, as my nieces who first played it with me when it first came out, they're going, oh my God, we're hooped. I mean, humanity is hooped. Look what it can do. And when I actually tried it out and I realized, well, it's kind of canned. Where's the authenticity? And so I said, okay, put in some authenticity or put in some more personal, it was still not something that lived in and through and out of me. So I couldn't actually put that into the world. It was just, as I said, it wasn't even good pollution. It was, on that level, it was just a thing. So if we don't put our whole hearts and integrity behind something, we are hooped, And so I would have them go on Spotify, for example, and I would have them play for 1 month, the whole thing on what their genres that they liked, and saw how algorithms actually work and how they wanted to play a different genre, and they came up with the same thing. So, algorithms can have an endpoint. They're programmed. They don't allow for great amounts of diversity. Right? Woo! And so I would just teach them that. And then try a media fast, which I've done with my grade 7 students. Let's go on a media fast. Oh, I can't do that. Really? Wow. Okay, let's try it for an hour then. Start, let alone a day without media. So just to recognize you work as a teacher, you're always working with comparison and contrast. That's how we see it, the world. We compare, we contrast, we compare, we contrast. So let's do that with media. Then let's get online. And now I want you to go into your aspect of research. We're studying geology.
Yeah, it's preparing them to go online, like what we were saying before about when I was growing up anyway. I had the computer before I even had access to the internet. The computer was brought into the home, and then I was moving away from the computer, and that was naturally me comparing and contrasting my life. The kids don't have it now, so you need to teach them how to do it with the media devices that they've got, and how to compare and contrast.
And to need the physical. So sports comes into that too. We all need to move. Everything is, as I said earlier, moving. Planets moving, we are moving. We stop moving. I mean, the new meme, which I just love, is sitting is the new smoking. At least, in Canada, you don't see a lot of people who smoke cigarettes anymore. It's very rare. Very rare. You can't walk down the street in a restaurant or anything. You go to Europe and it's there. But so you're behind us in that way. But sitting is the new smoking, and the lotion is motion. Motion is lotion, not lotion is motion is lotion. And so when you're calling upon the fact that movement is at the source of all things that are alive, not dead. So how is our mind alive? How are our hearts alive? How are our bodies alive? How do you bring that to the kids in any classroom? You can do it.
It's like what you said before with the 8-year-olds, where you got them to move in the morning. Even as an adult, like I go to the gym first thing I do is I wake up and I go to the gym. And the days I don't do that, I feel like I don't feel good. Or like, not that I don't feel good, I just don't feel like as active or as awake throughout the day or as focused.
And so there's a way to go to the gym. So movement, actually physical movement is fantastic, but also we opened up this podcast with what school really means is to pause. And so to pause and reflect, to pause and contemplate, to take time, what might be called contemplation or meditation or rest, to actually take those moments during the day and to reflect is also, there's a book called Indistractable, which I put out on my latest for people who subscribe to my website. They'll get my email newsletters, and I put out a book every month that I do, and the last one was called Indistractable, because we are so distractible, ever more so. So to actually pause, take a moment, reflect, contemplate this podcast, your day. I actually teach teachers how to do that with their students in the classroom and how to do that for themselves. Because something that is most human, the pause, the contract, rather than the constant expand, allows us to come into ourselves and work from the inside out. And the more we, this has gone down through the ages, the more we know ourselves, the more the more we can know ourselves, the more we can give to the world, period. Inside out. So I think the inside out might be my next podcast and my next article, where I'm kind of bringing some of this. And some of us do it all the time, and some of us need reminders. One of the key things that I see when I'm in the back of a classroom evaluating teachers, real teachers in real time, in Waldorf schools mostly, but not always, has been that they need to drink more water. I mean, it's just such a normal thing, but they don't think of it because they're teaching. So I said, well, I believe that, we all need a lot more water than we're drinking. And so, every student should have a water bottle at their desk. If they're sitting for any longer than 15 minutes. It's like, really? And you should demonstrate that by having your glass of water right there on your podium or on your desk or whatever you're teaching from, your whiteboard, your blackboard, whatever you've got. And you actively pause and drink and have drinking water. Like, our foremothers and forefathers would never have imagined that we would have had to teach that.
Right. Yeah, the most basic necessity that you could possibly need. We have to teach it.
One thing I've noticed with water is if I've not got it there, I won't think about it, I won't drink it. But if I've got a bottle there, then I just subconsciously, I'm just drinking it. I don't even think about it.
Well, there's a certificate I went after one of my first few years of teaching called Brain Gym, what has been dubbed as brain kinesiology. And it's also based on bilateral movement, breath, and drinking lots of water, and implementing that in the classroom. So that came through Brain Gym, brain kinesiology. That is, the most basic and the most amazing forms of classroom management I've come across. We think that we need some great psychosomatic methodology or really to implement some level of classroom management, or we need to be an autocrat and clamp down and control way too much and get classroom management. To me, a healthy classroom is kids out of desks, not in them. Okay. And what are kids doing out of the desk? They're working on small projects. They're working with each other on small groups. They're working on the blackboard or the whiteboard because I've got participation going on and I've put a bunch of problems that I want them up there for. I've got them moving. Okay. And so, and they say, what about classroom management? I said, you give those kids lots to do and you tell them what the timeline is and you give them lots of things. They will basically not want to go home.
Yeah, they're not
And
going to be bored, right? So you're not going to have anything to manage because no one's going to want to rebel against the. But when you're bored, you start rebelling, right? If these guys have loads to do, then they're going to be fully engaged.
so imagine a world and a group of kids, let's just say 12 years old, who are given a project around something. Let's go into the like Rome. They're studying the Roman world and what it brought to all of Europe as the early globalization factor. Let's just go there. And you say, okay, who's interested in the arts? So costuming and dress and culture. I want to do that. Who's interested in food? Oh, I want to do what they ate. Who's interested in aqueducts and who's interested in whatever? So you get the kids all learning that. And then you get calls from the parents saying, we have a problem. Why? Well, we wanted to go away for the weekend and all they want to do is hit the libraries. Or is it okay to go online because they just need to research da 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 da? We have another problem because when they come in the morning in the Waldorf classrooms, the teacher greets them all by hand and says, hello, Erin, how are you? Did you have a good night? What'd you do after school yesterday? Right? Or you look a little sleepy, Cam, and you're at the same time you're reading their palm print because you know that they're either hot and sweaty or they're really cool or they're looking straight at you or they can't look at you. You're reading them right off the bat like a book and you know how you need to work with them by the time you're through. Individual contact, very important. But it takes so long because every single student wants to tell you what they've learned about what they're studying. That's taking education back. That's educaring, right? From the inside out, not the outside in.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And having the discussions with the
Yes,
students.
that's right. Or you get a call when you're teaching, grade 8, and you're going into a new block and a new unit, and you get a call from one of the parents saying, "We've got a problem." It's like, really? Yeah, well, we're at Big White, we're skiing and we're boarding and skiing and we want to stay an extra day. But he said, I cannot miss a single lesson of Miss Walters. I will not miss it. Oh, get me on a bus, but I will not miss one day. Of a 13-year-old boy, tell me about it. Okay, so this education works. It works because it meets the kids and their hunger and desire to know and to learn out of something that's filled with life and curiosity. It's the fruit of what all of life really is, right? And so I'm all about helping teachers find their way in their practice to do that. And if they're bound by curricula, as I have been, by core competencies of their state or their province or their country, it's just that they don't have to buy it all. There are many really good teachers out there who are doing high fives in the classroom, who are letting their kids explore student voice, constructivist learning styles, who are recognizing their students as amazing. Many students, many teachers, and don't take this romantically or sexually, but fall in love with their students. They love who they're seeing. And I say to the teachers who don't love what they're seeing, then they're either in the wrong profession or they haven't looked deeper. Look deeper. Look more. Don't buy the status quo. Go into the alternative.
Yeah. Now, this has been a great insight into alternative schooling and what it actually means for society. Because I think a lot of people know the problems with public sort of normal schools. And they know that alternative schooling is an option. But like you said before, it's got a lot of myths around it. And the other thing is people think, oh, alternative schooling, that's great, but it's not going to work for my kid. I think a lot of people know about it, but they don't look into it. So from having this discussion, which has been really great, it sort of sheds a light on the reality of alternative schooling and Everything you've said, like, it's been amazing. But it really, to me, it's really shed a light on the reality of it and how needed it is right now, more than ever.
More than ever. More than ever.
Yeah, I think especially with like we've touched on technology a lot. With the increase in technology and the decrease in like human contacts kids and adults are having themselves, like, I think it is an important thing to be like to bring our future generations up knowing the importance of humanity, and that is, I think, for humans to prosper and not have technology and AI and a technocratic kind of state that people are worried about in the conspiracy space. I think we need to be teaching children about the strength of humanity and love.
It's beautiful, Aaron. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Diane. It's been absolutely amazing.
Yeah. It's sorry for the wait, and so glad that you could be with me today, and thank you.
No problem. It was well
I'll be
worth the wait.
listening. I'll be listening to both past and future podcasts that you put out. Thank you for your work in the world and for making, it a better place, making a difference. So that's courageous.